Every Life is Many Days, a podcast about James Joyce and his family in the contemporary novel. I'm Anne Fogarty from the School of English, Drama and Film at UCD. As director of the UCD James Joyce Research Centre, it is my pleasure to collaborate with Molly on this series of podcasts exploring how James Joyce and his family have been represented in the contemporary novel. 2022 marks the centenary of the publication of Ulysses on the 2nd of February 1922 by Shakespeare and Company in Paris. Inevitably, much attention will centre on Ulysses this year, but the centenary also provides an opportunity to reconsider Joyce's legacy and to think about how we view him both as a person and as a literary icon. The many gaps between Joyce the man and Joyce the writer have in recent years been movingly explored in a number of novels that think about his life in very different ways. This series features the work of 5 authors who have woven Joyce and his family into their novels: Anna Vaught, Nuala O'Connor, Frank McGuinness, Mary Costello, and Mary Morrissey. In conversation with them, we will discuss many aspects of Joyce's influence on the modern novel. We'll examine the much mythologized but often unremembered aspects of the lives of his partner, Nora Barnacle, and Lucia Joyce and Georgia Joyce, Joyce's son and daughter. These podcasts explore why Joyce continues to act as such a lively source of inspiration for contemporary fiction writers. They also examine why so many writers feel the imperative to reinvent him and at the same time to query aspects of his biography. These novels re-engage with Joyce, but they also encourage us to see him differently and from unexpected angles. It is a great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Anna Vaught. She's here to speak to us about her most recent novel, Saving Lucia, which was published by Blue Moose Press in 2020. Anna has many roles. She's a novelist, poet, essayist, reviewer, editor, copywriter, and proofreader. She's also a secondary English teacher, a tutor, and mental health campaigner. Her array of publications to date is as wide-ranging as the different professional roles that she holds. Her works include Killing Hapless Ally, a fictional memoir about mental illness, which was published in 2016, the 2018 Gothic novella, The Life of Almost, and the short story collection Famished, published in 2021. In addition, she has edited 2 anthologies, My Europe and Tempest, an anthology on dystopias, which appeared in 2019. Her essays, articles, reviews, and flash fictions have appeared widely online and in print. Anna speaks to us this morning from her home in the UK. Anna, a very big welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your wonderfully inventive and continuously surprising novel, Saving Lucia.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin by inviting you to give us and the listeners a short account of your novel.
Okay, so it's a story of the last days of the Honourable Violet Gibson, who was a patient for a very long time in St Andrew's Infirmary, what was the General Lunatic Asylum when it was built in Northampton. Violet Gibson, who's I hope we'll hear more about with her commemoration in Dublin, she, in 1926, amongst other things, she went to Rome and tried to kill Mussolini.
Yes.
Yes. So she was eventually deported, and she spent the many decades in the hospital, where a co-patient was Lucia Joyce,
Yes.
daughter of James. So that was my starting point, and it's a fictional account of Violet's last days. where she's been rehearsing for a very long time the most incredible flight of fancy, an imaginative adventure. We don't know if she met Lucia. We have no knowledge of the type. I'd like to think that they would have got on famously, because I'd love to meet Violet, love to meet Lucia. But she has Lucia as her scribe, and Violet conceives both of this incredible adventure and of recording the lost lives and personalities and fantastical intellect and survival skills, which we can imagine in other famous patients. I struggle a bit with that word. We'll come back to that.
Yes.
So
yes.
we've got Blanche, Queen of the Hysterics, as she was called, Blanche Whitman de Salpêtrière under Charcot in Paris. And then we've got, who was, until after she died, and Ernest Jones revealed her identity, Anna O later revealed to be Bertha Pappenheim, who was a subject of Breuer and Freud on hysteria. So Violet imagines this adventure, and off they go. All the things that they might have done, had their lives not been circumscribed. And it's also a way of freeing Lucia, both by imagining a freedom for her and by giving her a book with lots and lots of interplay of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. I've gone on a bit there, haven't I? But that's essentially it.
It's a great summary, because your novel, though very compact, is amazingly compendious. So we'll get back to all the figures, and it's kind of group biography, which again is very surprising, and that you come at Lucia through Violet Gibson.
I do.
So, but before we proceed any further, I'd like to invite you next to read from Saving Lucia.
Well, would you be happy if I read you the beginning?
Yes, indeed.
Now, this is Lucia speaking. So this is 2 and a bit pages, and I'm quite tempted to read you the end, but we don't want spoilers, do we? So this is the very beginning, and it's not clearly Lucia speaking yet, but it begins to reveal itself. Ready? Violet Albina Gibson, the Honourable, was behind bars, wearing an immaculate black crepe dress, clasping her finest manners, and a lovely lacquered fountain pen for letters to Churchill and others. She was a criminal because, in April 1926 in Rome, she shot Mussolini. And she was insane with it, an assassin with devotions, prayers, and visions, not a steady-handed murderer, but one that broke apart most untidily and could not be trusted. In prison in Rome, she threw a chamber pot at her guard and a flower press at a crack brain. For an honourable lady, such rude things, she said. Then there were the screams and intransigence, strange mystical tantrums. And in 1927, when they put her in the mental hospital in England, behind those necessary bars, through which you saw a fine vista, and the borders were lovely this year, she would never do a jigsaw or embroidery when instructed for her own good. Only towards the end of her life would she do one thing they've suggested. She agreed to stand outside with the birds and encourage them to feed from her hands. Other than that, a hopeless, obdurate virago, a strange, dotty old girl, mad with religion, and a danger, or a nuisance, or both. When she was locked up here at St Andrew's Hospital, Northampton, a lovely old house for those I call the feebles, I'm one of them, as you shall see, the case of murder was cleared up altogether. She was pardoned by Benito once his thugs were convinced she was on her own. Just a crazy hag taken leave of her senses, not a killer in a conspiracy. After a beating by Mussolini's baying crowd, prison and the asylum in Rome, and the embarrassment of the Foreign Office and family, this is what we both have now. Was the right thing to do. It used to be called the General Lunatic Asylum, where they put the people like us. There are many lifers here. They give them routine and mahogany, croquet on the lawns, and medications to soothe, and bars on the sash windows, which have been denuded of cords, just in case. They must have lost the old one, surely, but records of lives, as I have discovered, and as I will show you here, can go awry. But as I was saying, St Andrews is quite a select place if you have the money, because you get a well-appointed room of your own to be mad in, feather down for your tears, even the illusion of freedom. They are aristocrats, some of the inmates, and all of means, so that's what Violet got. Posh. Still, you are locked in, surrounded by mutes doing crochet. Violet rocked into silence when it was all too much. But sometimes, as you will learn, she emerged, and oh Lord, she was jubilant, full of a reckless imagination. And so it was that in the last days of her last year, when she and I were patients and friends together, she asked me to be her scribe. Violet was determined not to be reduced to hearsay and notes in hospital archives. She was clever too, and kind, because she knew when I arrived all about me. That I was the dotty daughter of the genius writer. I heard her whisper to me that she felt I had been forgotten. Also, that I had reduced myself, and if I would only buck up my ideas. And she said, dear, dear girl, none of that is good enough, and I long to set you free. So, this is her story, and also mine, and what it gifted to me. Will you come? It will jangle, what with Violet's verbal flights of fancy, but I so wanted to write a more or less true story. My own previous work, my pretty inchoate novel, had all been burned up by the family, I feared, so I tried like I had never done before and became Violet's scribe. Sometimes I took notes from her direct. Sometimes I listened in to visitors, the medical staff, or the most lucid of the other inmates. I patiently assembled and edited and imagined, just as Violet had done with her memories and the tales she needed to tell. I worked like crazy, and then I was sane enough. This is how it began, when the old demented crone tried to find some peace and to save me. When she'd done with trying to change history. Oh, she was quite a girl. First chapter.
Thank you. It's a wonderfully vivid opening, and it introduces readers immediately to that double scenario in the novel, which is absolutely fascinating. The unlikely fact, as you say, that Violet Gibson,
Mhm.
a prominent Irish woman, and Lucia Joyce, another prominent Irish woman, both of whom are troubled and eclipsed and vanished from history, and both of whom spend almost 3 decades. It's unimaginable in St Andrews that they coincide in this space, but that we don't know enough about them.
No,
And it's also interesting there that Violet becomes Lucia's project. She sees herself as the scribe, and Lucia is Violet's project as well.
indeed.
And
Yes.
sometimes you don't know whose voice is whose as well as you read through.
I know that's deliberate, and we took the
Yes,
speech
yeah.
punctuation out, so I just hope everybody can, enjoy it.
So, what were the beginnings of the novel for you? How did you first stumble across the factual accident of these two women coinciding in Northampton? And after that, how did you begin to research their stories?
Okay, well, very simple beginning, and this has happened to me a few times, this serendipitous thing. I was researching something, and I forget what I was looking for. Something to do with plants, I think, and roses. That was it. And I happened to see a photograph of a person who appeared to be an elderly woman, I think, in an old raincoat or like an old-fashioned gabardine, with her back to the camera. Black and white
Yes,
photograph, trees all around her. And do you know the photograph I'm talking about?
yes, I
Yeah.
do.
And then I saw that she had birds on her sleeves. And then I looked further and I thought she was in the most beautiful pose that was sort of almost at odds with who I kind of thought she must be. Like, like a sort of position of grace and these beautiful it's just a beautiful encounter with the natural world. And I thought, who is that? And that's how it began, just a sight of that photograph. And from there, I found Frances Donna Saunders' wonderful biography of Violet Gibson, the woman who shot Mussolini, and just
Yes.
kept going. And then it was through that book and further researches that I discovered who she was, and I discovered who Lucia was her co-patient, and just other things about both of their histories. I was absolutely enraptured, I must say. And that's how it began. Research after that, just what I could find from archival material that was online in terms of St Andrews, because unfortunately, when I was researching it, the archives were being moved from the hospital into the centre of town. But the staff were fantastically helpful to me. The Donna Saunders biography I mentioned, and the kind of the side of the book that I guess I've talked about a bit, but this is the first conversation I've had. I am, and I have been since my late teens, what we would call a service user now. So I was able to draw on my own experience of mental illness, mental health problems, and things that were born of trauma. And my love of Joyce sort of fed. Not that I'm a Joyce scholar like yourself. It's intimidating, but it seemed to feed naturally into the language for me and the feel of the book. And also, and I think we might come back to this later, because I had a very difficult upbringing and early life, which has changed me radically. I had to rely incredibly hard on my imagination and my reading. So I drew on that in the book, that concept of what you do when you have no other resources.
That is a great theme, because Violet in particular very often says that it's those who are locked up, who are imprisoned, incarcerated, who have to work with their imagination.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I turn to Lucia Joyce just for a moment to begin with? Obviously, we'll keep winding back to her, and it's always a double her in a way in the novel, Violet and Lucia together. Even though she disappears really from the world for the last many decades of her life, she's now become a kind of public icon. She's very, very much held up as an icon by feminists around the world. So her damaged life has attracted a lot of attention. Does that seem ironic to you?
Of course. And at the same time, I worry about it, because when we're holding her up, as you say, as an icon, and saying, even the title, Saving Lucia, I've had, worried about that, because I think, how much are we taking from her as we hold her up? Are we, in a sense, we're inventing a personality and a backstory for her? So how I react to that is, I think on one level it's wonderful, on the other level I want to run away, because I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it as well. So it's a combination of the two things, I think. So yes, it is, yes.
And what's interesting in this series of podcasts about authors who fictionalize facets of the Joyce family is that Joyce is always there and not there. He has to be rendered invisible, muted in some ways, but he also is a kind of seedbed for images and lots of other things. And Jung very famously and problematically from the point of view of Lucia and Joyce himself in particular, analysed Lucia, and he declared that Joyce and her father were like two people going to the bottom of a river, one falling and the other diving. And that is one way in which the troubled relationship between Joyce and Lucia has been analysed. Joyce himself refuted it, that she, in a way, suffers for his art. She's kind of collateral damage. It goes way beyond that. She is the artist's daughter, but she never manages to be that artist herself. That's one of the many things that is denied to her, or that she can't realise.
So in Saving Lucia, when I was thinking about that, and again, I worried about it, I was kind of trying to give her the sense of her own work. Pals, this is mine. And you've got your running Finnegan's Wake joke. I don't know, is it a good joke? I don't know. Just the idea of the work in progress. She's saying, yeah, that was mine, actually. So it's sort of just the notion of her having books, having stories that are entirely her own. Because otherwise she only exists as an entity because of her father. And so this is what I was wrestling with. I cannot, as I was saying before, say I'm entirely comfortable with what I've done. It makes me a bit twitchy, but I hope I've given her an adventure. Or let her have one which is entirely hers, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it certainly does. I mean, you draw out the degree to which she has to grow into a voice. I mean, she's there already in chapter 1, but learning to be the scribe and author and comes through much more fully towards the end. But there's still lots of questions. So you by no means attempt to deliver her to some salvation that can't really be there for her. And that's really my next question. I mean, can a fictional reimagining of Lucia save her or not? It's kind of saving Lucia is a kind of question, your title as well, not a statement.
Well spotted. Do you know the original title of this book when I was writing it was Passerines, because I was thinking of the type
I
of
see.
birds that were on Violet's sleeve, and then I've got the bird motif, which you were talking about when you emailed me. Can we save her? We can hold her up, but yes, I do see the title as a question. Yes, so I think we hold her up and we say, here she is. Here's who she might have been. Here's who she could be, and also, isn't she rather wonderful just as she is? From what we do see, as a survivor. One thing that I'm particularly rail against is the idea, and you see it everywhere. You see it in nonfiction, and I always grumble about it. Is the idea of somebody who has a mental health problem, or somebody who has a mental illness, somebody with chronic illness, somebody who's disabled, being held up as an inspiration.
I agree. Yes.
That trope is often it's putting somebody in a box, and it's often it's othering, it's demeaning. So I hope I have avoided that with Lucia, partly through having some knowledge of the history, but also having been a patient repeatedly myself. Hope so.
I think because your fiction about Lucia and Violet in the first instance, and then two other women, Anna O, the woman who was analysed by Breuer and Freud, and then Blanche Whitman, and by widening out, becoming this kind of restless group biography, keeps us moving and thinking, so that we don't fix these women, and you keep discovering there's even more to know about them and more to know about the world around them. So you can't land on any kind of certainty or fixity. And it's not that you kind of plunge us into skepticism either in the novel, but that it's an exploration. So I love how you keep things open on that level.
Thank you. That's what I was aiming for. There's been a little bit of criticism of the book that I've seen, including by the odd Joyce scholar, that introducing the extra women was confusing. But I was trying to do just as you described there.
No, not at all. I think it makes absolute sense. And I've more questions about that in a moment. But I'd like next to come on to the idea of imagination, which you sustain as this wonderful thread, part of Violet's kind of manifesto in the novel. And there's certain ideas that she keeps repeating and that become part of the texture of the novel and the kind of belief system and a way of thinking about how people survive in unimaginable circumstances. She obviously wanted to leave St. Andrews.
She
Lucia,
repeatedly tried and petitioned for it. Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
So what is imagination for all of the four women in the novel, all of whom are, the only person who really lives a life separate is Anna O. Bertha Pappenheim.
Yes. Imagination is, for me, as I've tried to draw it in the novel, the place over which one has control. The place that is entirely our own. It's inviolate. Nobody else can come in and say, no, that's not how it's done, And so that's what I see it as. And for Violet, it's the most extraordinary fantasy because she's been rehearsing a fantasy that makes complete sense. It's humane what she's doing and logical. That's the thing. It's not some dotty, random thing. But it's the place that you have. It's how you sustain yourself. And for me, and I've written essays about this. When I was a kid, I was often very, very scared, and I tried to tell people why, and I could not. So I had my books and I had my imagination and, even lines of poetry. And this is really something I'm drawing on. It was like a sort of talisman for me. Those were my comfort, those were my worlds. And the notion of the imaginative world as being something which is truly substantial. Not that one can't tell the difference, because then we would be in trouble. But it's it's a beautiful thing and a necessary thing.
Yeah.
As it was for me.
Yeah. And I think some of the comments you were making there about imagination also applied to this kind of troublesome term biofiction, which gets very misinterpreted because people keep forgetting that it is fiction, it is imagination. And the whole point to it is it may take things from reality, but it's going to invent and speculate and be
Of course.
counterfactual as well.
Yes.
And that's something you do with your four women. They can't. Historically, it would be impossible for them to know each other. I think it's Lucia towards the end says the possible can be stretched.
Oh,
Is one of her
absolutely.
phrases, and that's what happens in your novel.
It is, yes.
And can you say just something more about bringing those four women together so that the novel becomes a kind of time machine as well, and all four women become time travelers, and they move back and forth in time into the past, into the present, but also into the future where we are as readers.
Yes. Do you know what they're doing most of all? They're having fun.
That's true. That's true.
That's
Yes.
the
Yes.
idea.
Yeah.
And it's like Violet she's literally dotting about, and with Lucia getting, more and more confident, she's giving them all presents. What would you have liked? But yeah, they do dot about, linked by the birdies, all the things that, I don't want to say all the things they might have been, because they were good enough, and that's what Lucia says. As we are, we're good enough. Don't hold us up, and think what we could have been had we been better. We're already,
Yes.
we're human. We're miracles.
Yes, having fun. Yeah, I agree about that. It's this big adventure, an escapade, but also seems to be a kind of both group therapy and a feminist calling out of things as they strengthen in voice and get to know each other and visit different parts of each other's lives.
Absolutely.
And in fact, your novel seems very much, certainly halfway through, when they begin to move around even more in a more mobile fashion, in and out of each other's lives, seems to me like a magical realist novel. The fantasy element of the psycho that you talk about at the beginning.
Oh, yes, thank you. No, it really is. It's fantastical. But you see, it's not something. Obviously, it's a bit wild, isn't it? But why not? Why not? But it's not something which doesn't make sense,
I
because
agree.
it's addressing need, and a thirst for life.
And you also go after sort of given aspects of their lives. The shooting of Mussolini, which, like you
Ooh,
say,
yes.
which the first chapter indicates, is weirdly turned almost into a comic episode because she fails,
Yes, she
whereas
hit
it
its
should be
nose.
taken much
Yeah.
more seriously.
Yes, she got closer than anyone else. Yeah, and when they invade Charcot's house, and they steal his banquet and play his piano, and just things that they have. She's very rude. Lucia's very rude about her mother, and but it's rebellion. It's fun. It's rebellion. It's doing things that they're not supposed to do.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, hope you enjoyed that.
Can I talk a little bit more with you about the twinning of Violet Gibson and Lucia Joyce? Violet being the older of the two and predeceases Lucia anyway. As we mentioned already, they seem to cross over. They have this joint project
Yeah.
of reviving Lucia, as it were, saving her, and reviving Lucia, energizing her and allowing her to become the artist that she is. But their voices also seem to coincide. So there are many moments in the novel where even the narrative kind of tells you this is Lucia, or Lucia disrupts things and says, "This is me speaking," and it's very interesting on that level. The kind of female bonds that you're exploring here, and I think particularly ones that emerge in the context of where they are, St Andrews in Northampton, that go out of their isolation, this kind of kinship between these two women who, as you said at the very beginning, we don't even know if they met or had a conversation.
No. I like the idea. Well, you referred to it as ventriloquizing, didn't you? But they can finish. They're like a sort of, they could finish one another's sentences. It's a kinship, but it's understanding and it's company. And what I was thinking of, I referred back to being a child and being very frightened and having my imaginative world. But beyond that, when you are ill or when you have mental health problems that will not go away, or when you have psychotic episodes that take you out of the world, to have somebody who is, I was going to say complicit, but that's not what I mean, somebody who understands that without judgment, and can appreciate what humour there is, what rebellion and what survival techniques there may be in there. I suppose I was kind of drawing on some of the people that I've met along the way, really, and imagining that as a sort of hope, if you like, for Lucia and Violet. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
tell you at some
yeah.
point, if you like, about the nurses that I found, which was fascinating. I don't know, are you aware of that?
No, no.
Oh, well, at the very beginning of the book, it says dedicated to the nursing sisters of Roscommon.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I found them. They're in Massachusetts. So they came as nursing sisters together, and eventually went as a family to go and live in the States. And I found the remaining nurse called Aunt Nancy. And it was such a comfort to me, if that makes sense, because she spoke about how much they all loved Violet and how funny she was. And so, if anybody's reading the book, you can look at the end and see something about Aunt Nancy's 90th birthday. So I guess that was another part of it when she finally became real. And great favourite.
One thing you interrogate very much in the course of the novel is the whole question about who is mad, what is madness, and that quite clearly the wrong people are being accused of madness, that the hysteric was Mussolini and not Violet, but she is the one who ends up incarcerated as the result of her assassination attempt. So the novel keeps worrying about this borderline between sanity and insanity, but also worrying about just this concept of the mad woman. I love the way you delve into Mussolini's biography, for instance, and show how there are all kinds of mad women that he creates in and around him, and that shore up the myth of the fascist dictator.
Yes, there's a lot going on, isn't there? Yes, I do interrogate that because, of course, it doesn't make sense. Obviously, one should not go around shooting people, even if they're dictators. Should one? I don't know. But no, we have to say no. But yeah, it does interrogate that question. And Violet says, and Lucia echoing her, who is mad here? Who is mad? Because they're drawing also on the question of morality. Can we say that an absolute moral failure, Violet's asking you, is madness? So interesting question, isn't it? And and the language around mental ill health is often very, very flippant and remains so to this day. There's a tremendous stigma around it, which I hope I always challenge. So I'm thinking about that too.
Indeed, yeah, yeah. And you also write really interestingly, and this is another kind of echoing line in what Violet says, and Anna O. Bertha as well, that Bertha in particular, actually, she repeats that you do not need to heal completely to be effective.
Oh, yes.
Another kind of illusion about mental health, that you can deal with the issues. You're either completely mad and locked up, and out of it, or you're healed better, and everything is over and done with. And Anna O is a good case in point, because her case history is ended and she's supposedly recovered, according to Breuer and Freud, but she continues to have difficulties.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does. I think we're back to the trope of the well, connected with the idea of the ill person as an inspiration because they get better. But the reality is, well, let me talk about myself. I'm never going to get better, not completely. I am always going to manage uh, probably depressive periods, anxiety. It's managed, but more or less, and dissociative episodes as a result of what happened to me. I'm never going to be completely fixed, but I'm resolute that even so, I am out in the world and I'm out and doing. And this, I didn't start writing until 6 years ago. I don't have a long publication history, but I didn't have the confidence to start because I thought, I'm just going to say it. I thought, well, I'm a bit mad. Just when I was holding all these things down, I thought that about myself, and then I had this tremendous moment of rebellion. Since when I haven't shut up. So saving Lucia is a result of that too. That I'm going to go out into the world broken, but I'm still there. Thank you for commenting on that. That was lovely.
And just a few final questions. I'm really interested in the way that you see history in this connected way and as ever-widening circles and overlapping layers. I'm mixing all my metaphors here so that you can't just look at one life. No one can focus in on one life. Say if they're interested in Lucia Joyce and not Violet Gibson, that's not feasible in your novel, and all the lives are interwoven. You can't see Violet as a subject without thinking about Mussolini. You can't think about Mussolini without thinking about his first wife and the suicide of his son and so on. And so it continues. And you very often mention the 8,000 and more anonymous women in Charcot's hospital in Paris, whose lives we can't know at all except via Blanche, but she's kind of the star of the system. The other women are kind of invisible. So they're the lives, the kind of knowable lives and the shadowy, invisible lives. But your novel keeps pushing against those borders so that you suggest to us, we need to know more about all these other lives that we kind of edit out all the time.
Absolutely, we do, because those voices, the edited out voices, are just as much a part of the picture as everything else.
Yes. Yeah. Then I would like next to ask you about a beautiful and central thread, very strong thread of images, the birds, the passerines in the novel, your original title. Obviously linked with Violet. She's the bird woman, she's St. Francis feeding the birds. And there's some kind of element of, I was thinking of medieval stories,
Yes,
Chaucer's
thank
Parliament
you.
of Fowls,
Yes,
the bird
yeah.
fable. And there's a kind of eco-fable element to
So there
things as
is.
well. All these women are birds, and they go out together as birds to render things topsy-turvy. So just some further comments from you on actually the word passerine, which most people won't know, and what it means for you. It's a lovely term.
Oh, the passerine. I'm going to get this wrong, aren't I? The passerine refers to a particular group of birds, which includes, I'm going to embarrass myself here, but which included all the birds that Violet had on her sleeve. So that is where I got the title from. And then I conceived of each of the women being a bird. And also I was fascinated. We know that Violet loved art. And I was fascinated by I refer to the Annunciation, and there are various versions, or many versions of that painting, some of which have a little swallow in them, and some of which don't. And so I thought, where did that go? Perhaps it went to Violet. My imagination sort of scuttling off in various directions. But it's to do with freedom. It's to do with art. It's they are birds. It is, and I do. It's interesting you said about Chaucer. I'm also thinking about medieval symbolism and just so many different things that just seem to me
And
germane.
you link the image to Ovid Metamorphoses, the
I
idea
do
of change
indeed.
as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful image. But again, it's kind of otherworldly as well, so it means it never settles as an image. I also just was thinking of a kind of pun within the word. These women are passing around, passing themselves off, being passed off, and so on.
Indeed.
Pass by.
Yeah, you get 10 out of 10 there for spotting the pun. First
Yes.
person. I thought that's not a very good pun, but you see, yes, indeed. So, it's an image, and it's also, there's something that's joyous about it. That's a rapture, and that was important as well. I wanted to show that.
And I'd like finally, I suppose, inevitably to talk about the ending of the novel where Lucia has much more strongly, Violet has now died. And one fact we didn't mention is they're actually buried close to each other, aren't they,
Yes, they
in
are.
Northampton?
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
Lucia's grave rather grander than Violet's, which
I
is
see.
plain
Yeah,
and looks terribly unfinished.
yes, yes.
Which has rather fascinated me. Yes.
But at the end, there are two moments where Lucia addresses the reader. One much more strongly calling out in a kind of contemporary voice. I was troubled, but I was theirs. So I suppose I want, yes, an apology from my
Yes.
family. I think it's all we ever want. I want them to say, I was cruel, I was a bad parent, I put the work, the wake, the home, the drink before you. So a very charged moment and a direct one, very literally a 21st century calling out by Lucia Joyce of her circumstances.
Oh, indeed. And you know what? I have to tell you that was a very, very personal thing, because if you are, and now I cannot say we had the same experience, but I know that if had my own parents, at some point said sorry for the things that happened because of them, a great amount of healing would have happened. So I am not saying I had the same experience, but I'm feeling it in that quotation, which is, I guess, why it sounds so modern.
But I think every modern, current reader of the novel will respond.
Yeah.
We recognise that's our language, so we do connect. But on the other hand, I mean that's one of Lucia's moments towards the
Uh-huh.
end. But on the other hand, she simply invites the reader in at the very end. Is aware of the fact that she's created a text and addresses the reader in the final paragraph. God love you, reader, and like I said, feel free to annotate the margins of this work in progress. This strange story of women who lived and laughed and loved and left. Of course, a Wakeam riff in the very
Thank
final
you. No,
moments.
people haven't been spotting that, but you have.
Yes.
Yes, it's a lifting. I loved it. That's my favorite line in the book, I think. But and I had that in my head all the way through. That's where I want to end up. Yeah, yeah.
And it's a lovely open moment, I think, at the end as well, because we're continuously reading this work in progress. And we're kind of, it's almost like the early genetic version of Finnegan's Wake. It remains a work in progress because of Lucia. Okay, I think we'll draw things to a close here. So I'd like to thank you for that fascinating and really rich discussion of your novel, Saving Lucia. So that's all for this episode of Every Life is Many Days. And I'd like to remind listeners that Anna Vaught's novel, Saving Lucia, is published by the wonderful independent press, Blue Moose Press, and I would encourage you to read it and discover it for yourselves. This podcast was produced by Benedict Schlepper-Connolly and Ian Dunphy, with Ian Dunphy on sound. For more from RadioMoLI, visit radio.molly.ie. Thank you.